Over the past couple of weeks, 537 people in Canada have been engaging in hunger strikes. The purpose of the action is to bring attention to Israel's ongoing siege in Gaza and to demand that the Canadian government stop supplying arms to Israel. My next two guests are part of a campaign called Gaza Starving, which is heading up this initiative. Tarek Loubani is a physician in Ontario who has worked in Gaza for over a decade, and Nadine Nasir is an organizer with Gaza Starving. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us, Desmond.
Thank you.
Nadine, let me start with you. Tell me about how you conceived of this hunger strike campaign for Gaza.
As shortly after the genocide started, so shortly after October 8th, we were seeing images that were the most horrific things that I think all of us have ever seen in our lives. And the extent of killing and the total siege on Gaza made me realize that this is a completely unprecedented situation and one that deserves an unprecedented response. So it felt like, personally, I felt completely disenfranchised, where I was doing all the things along with numerous other activists. People across this country were occupying MP offices, signing petitions, writing letters, doing all of the kind of ordinary things that people would do and more to try to stop this from happening. And yet our government continues to approve export permits to have weapons go to Israel while it's committing a genocide. So I thought that's really what requires an unprecedented response and a powerful action that's been used in many other scenarios.
Tarek, the use of the hunger strike tactic is particularly, I think, poignant in this circumstance, given the issue of hunger inside Gaza as this siege rages on. Can you talk a little bit about what we know about food inside of the blockaded territory of Gaza and how hunger is affecting people there as this occupation and siege continues?
You're right that this is both an act of solidarity and an act of protest. Protest because we are using the one tool that we have, our own bodies, putting them on the line and saying that we disagree and we want change. An act of solidarity because our brothers, our sisters, our siblings in Gaza are dying of starvation. At this point, over 80% of all the people in the world who are in famine, who are facing severe hunger, are in the Gaza Strip. And this is not a failed crop or an accident. This is the deliberate targeting of Palestinians. The context is that for almost 2 decades, Palestinians have been under blockade. And that has included what Dov Weisglass, one of the advisors to the Israeli government, called the Gaza diet. He mistakenly thought that if you killed Palestinians of starvation, that the world would cry out and insist that the Israelis stop. And so he kept the Israelis on something like 2,300 calories. Sorry, he kept the Palestinians on something like 2,300 calories for years. So this is not new. The Israelis have used hunger to try to control Palestinians for almost 2 decades. And this is almost the next natural escalation to try to starve them to death.
We're now on the heels of a decision by the International Court of Justice, which recently said that it is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide inside of Gaza in the court's view. And then the court ordered some interim measures, which the Canadian government has essentially treated as non-existent. The Canadian government has said, we don't necessarily accept the premise of South Africa's claim at the United Nations against Israel that it is committing genocide. And so, yes, this ruling has happened, but there hasn't really been a response from Canada. Nadine, what has it been like campaigning and seeing this kind of wall of denial from our government as you try to reach out to them about their continued supplying of support and weapons to Israel?
Well, one thing is, I think that, I had to be reminded that our representatives are actually supposed to represent us. And it just doesn't feel like that at all. And so I think ultimately the tide has turned and people are seeing with this determination from the ICJ, being on trial for genocide, and the understanding that it's actually quite plausible that this is in fact a genocide and that Canada is complicit in this, and yet our government continues to fuel this, to arm Israel as it commits a genocide. It's infuriating, and it's also really shocking, because I think that the government hasn't quite realized that, or chooses not to realize that this is what the majority of Canadians want. They want an end to this. We know from public opinion polling that the majority voice is saying they want a ceasefire. It's very, very clear. Why isn't our government listening? And why do people in Canada have to literally stop eating in the hundreds to try to get attention to the fact that sending weapons to a government that is currently committing a genocide is a bad thing that they don't want? It's pretty shocking that we have to come to this, because they're just not listening. It's an act of desperation.
Tarek, people can go on a hunger strike for a day, for a week. It can be a more symbolic kind of act, or it can be a much more prolonged and forceful act that puts one's own body at risk. Generally speaking, can you talk about what happens to the human body when it's deprived of food?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, people can go on what's called a wet hunger strike, which is what's generally proposed with Gaza Starving, for an almost indefinite period of time. So that means that if you're able to take in some water, so a little bit of sugar, and some of the other main vitamins of life, like let's say through multivitamin, can go on for quite a while. It's really several weeks in that the lack of fat, which is the thing that you don't get just drinking water and juice, would become seriously a problem. So if people are interested in this kind of a thing, we've done it so that there are very few health effects. Of course, people should consult their physicians if they have any mental or physical health issues that may interfere here. However, a day's fast really will help them empathize and will help send a message, but shouldn't put most people in danger. And I don't generally encourage people to do it for more than a day at a time. I know some people have worked their way up within this campaign because they feel so strongly. However, I think for most people here who are thinking of doing it for the first time, then consider a 24-hour fast where they're drinking what's called a wet fast.
Now, that's for somebody, say, in Canada who can make that decision and can control what they take in. What happens to the body of a person who just doesn't have enough to eat and cannot control that over a longer period of time?
In terms of what's happening right now with the famine in the Gaza Strip, initially, when people started to have the food get cut down, they moved to obviously minimal rationing, to the point where initially, when this campaign first started, most people were able to eat a quarter or a half piece of bread per day as part of their ration. That's no longer the case. Now, most people haven't tasted bread in weeks. Some people are able to get it. They're luckier. When the Israelis withdraw, they might leave some rations behind. Once that happens, people's bodies start to cannibalize. So the body will start to eat itself so that it can provide nutrition. It takes the things that both give nutrition and also take up energy. So the first thing that goes is the muscles. People become tired and fatigued. They become foggy, unable to think clearly. And as time goes on, once their fat stores are totally depleted, then they enter very deep starvation. That's where people are at now. At this point, the elderly and the young have started to die of starvation in Gaza. And that doesn't look like it's going to change as time, and of course the sick. And as time goes on, healthier and healthier people will die. Even if today we were to completely reverse the famine, people will die because people have gotten sick from this, the lack of clean water, We're talking about fasting, but remember, there's no clean water to be had for any intents and purposes. So people don't just lack nutrition, they also have no fluid with which they can rehydrate. And when they do take fluids, it's usually dirty, giving them hepatitis, giving them typhoid, which is now spreading in the camps and in Gaza in general. So those are some of the things. And of course, the terminal point is the death of the healthiest. And that can take several months, but it has been several months. So I expect that without some deep changes, that'll be happening soon.
And instead, Nadine, of some kind of change or intervention on the part of Canada's government, what we've actually seen instead in recent days is that Canada has joined several other countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, in moving to defund UNRWA, the United Nations Works Relief Agency, perhaps the most important humanitarian group working inside of Gaza right now. That we know will only add to the humanitarian disaster that is happening right now. And I wonder if you can respond to the Canadian government's decision. I should be clear that Canada has, with these other countries, chosen to temporarily defund UNRWA after Israel accused a dozen of the organization's members of taking part on Hamas's attack inside Israel on October 7th. UNRWA says that they haven't received any concrete evidence as to how this occurred or any instructions about what they as an organization are meant to do to get the funding for the entire agency, which is over 30,000 people, restored. So Nadine, what's your response to Canada's move to suspend funding to this critical humanitarian agency?
I find it to be really interesting that because of allegations of a few people potentially doing something, an entire agency, the lifeline for Palestinians, the little tiny bit left that they have, Canada is no longer providing any funds for. And yet when we know that it's quite likely, according to international law, the International Court of Justice says, hey, by the way, this actually could really be a genocide here. And they're saying, yeah, we have jurisdiction, and Canada's not, saying anything or doing anything. So it's pretty shocking, actually. And it just really shows that double standard that has consistently been different. Palestinians are always treated differently. We've seen this, we know this. Anti-Palestinian racism within the Canadian government and beyond is very alive and well today. And it's really unfortunate, and I can't believe I actually just said unfortunately. It's horrific right now being a Palestinian Canadian and seeing just how little my life and the lives of so many others really mean to this government. I will say though, before the Canadian government was complicit in the genocide through sending arms, and now they're really complicit through sending arms and also continuing to starve this population. So this was really a slap in the face, and it was really interesting timing also on the same day of the ICJ announcement that case does in fact is going to be heard by the ICJ.
And Nadine, let me stay with you. Yes,
if I can just add one thing, I must say I slightly disagree with Nadine when she says that there's a double standard. I don't see a double standard. I think that our perception of the standard is what's wrong. We thought that the standard was a promotion of human rights and equality for all. But really, all the evidence from Canada's history to its behavior today is that the standard is more or less white supremacy. The standard is colonialism. In that sense, Canada's staying true. So if we try to interpret Canada's actions through a lens of Canada being a humanitarian country, that's one of the things that doesn't help us explain their behavior. If we interpret the actions of Canada through that lens of white supremacy and through that lens of colonialism, then all of a sudden the distinction, the difference between what happened with people in Ukraine and what's happening in people in Gaza vis-a-vis Canada's response makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Nadine, we know that in 2022, the Canadian, that Canada itself as an entity sent over $21 million worth of military goods directly to Israel, including 3 million bombs, torpedoes, missiles, and other explosives. And we've seen the devastation. I was reading from a World Bank report recently that said 45% of the buildings in Gaza now are so damaged that they are unsalvageable, 45%. And so this call to end Canada's military support, in the overall scheme of Israel's military capabilities, it might seem small. But what do you think the significance would be of Canada reversing course on this kind of military support?
We also know that actually some of the weapons components that are used in the fighter jets right now in Gaza are being used to kill Canadian weapons components are being used to kill Palestinians right now in Gaza. So I think, tangibly, it's more than symbolic to remove our weapons from Israel's hands, to get them out of Israel's hands. But it also sets a precedent. It also shows Israel, first of all, you can't keep doing this. It's a message to Israel. It's a message to everyone in the world that this is possible. We've seen it happen in Italy, and this is a really, really good way to set a precedent internationally for the type of work that needs to be done by activists.
Tarek, you mentioned bread earlier, and some of the reports that I've been reading are talking a lot about bakeries inside of Gaza and the key role that they play in making sure that people can be fed, and the reality that most of the bakeries have been destroyed. And I wonder if you could just return to this idea of bread and talk culturally from what you've seen when you're working inside Gaza of the day-to-day importance of being able to produce this product inside that is being lost right now.
Yeah, there is no functioning bakery inside Gaza right now. The people who are making bread are, because of the severe lack of flour, especially with the settler blockades, are now mixing in animal fodder. And so the baking that's happening is happening generally in individually made clay ovens, which is an old technology that Palestinians have had for centuries, and is being made on a family level. Generally, some family will manage to get a bag of flour one way or the other, and then will share it with the neighborhood. Bread has always been one of the key staples of Palestinian life. And so when I was there, it was the thing that I always had with pretty much every meal. It's easy and cheap calories. There's a lot of sugar in there, a lot of glucose, and so there's a lot of energy that comes from it. It's always been a key constituent. Bread mixed in with olive oil is very often, or even eaten with olives, is very often one of the things that very poor Palestinians would eat, sometimes as their only meal of the day. So for bakeries, firstly, bakeries were treated like military targets. They were systematically eliminated in the beginning of the war. And the bakeries that did remain ran out of fuel very quickly thereafter, because, of course, baking bread is a high energy consumption activity. And then the people who were making bread at home started to run out of flour that remained. So this really is such an intentional way of trying to induce severe starvation and death in Palestinians by taking away from them one of their most fundamental staple.
Finally, Nadine, if people want to join the Gaza Starving campaign, if they want to engage in hunger strike themselves, or if they want to continue to keep up the pressure on the Canadian government to stop the sending of arms to Israel, what can they do?
They can visit us at www.gazastarving.com and read our instructions and sign up if they want to participate in the hunger strike. Right now we have 2017 hunger strike days that have already been done, because numerous people came back and they said that they felt like this was one way that they could contribute. And so they have been doing it every week. Some people have been doing it, they are signed up for 32 days straight, which is the limit of how many days I've opened up on the calendar. So they can join us in whatever way that they can, whether it's one day or more. And of course, to make sure to write to the politicians to explain what's happening. All of that is included on the website, as well as to put out some videos to share why they're doing this, why it's important to them, and exactly what the demand is.
Nadine Nasir and Tarek Loubani, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.